It was a rainy evening when the accident happened. The streets were slick with water, and the sky was a murky gray. My friend Jake was driving home from work, his mind preoccupied with the usual worries of life. He was a careful driver, always cautious on the road. But that day, something was different. Perhaps it was the weather, or maybe it was just a cruel twist of fate. But as he rounded a corner, a car suddenly swerved into his lane, out of control. The crash was loud and violent. Metal crunched against metal, glass shattered, and in an instant, everything changed. Jake's car was thrown off the road, spinning wildly before it slammed into a tree. Inside, Jake was tossed around like a rag doll, his seatbelt the only thing keeping him from being ejected from the vehicle. When the car finally came to a stop, the silence that followed was deafening. The rain continued to pour down, the droplets mingling with the shattered glass on the ground. Jake was unconscious, slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. It wasn't long before help arrived. Someone had seen the accident and called 911. The paramedics worked quickly, carefully extricating Jake from the wreckage. He was unresponsive, his breathing shallow. They loaded him into the ambulance, and with sirens blaring, they rushed him to the nearest hospital. At the hospital, doctors and nurses sprang into action. Jake was in critical condition. He had suffered multiple injuries, broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a severe head injury. They immediately took him into surgery, working tirelessly to stabilize him. Hours passed, and as the surgery went on, Jake's family and friends began to gather at the hospital, their faces etched with worry. I arrived shortly after, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake had been my best friend for years, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. The surgery lasted for what felt like an eternity. When the surgeon finally emerged, his expression was grave. "Jake is stable, but he's in a coma," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We've done everything we can, but now we have to wait and see how his body responds." The next few weeks were some of the hardest of our lives. Jake remained in the ICU, hooked up to machines that monitored his every breath, his every heartbeat. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but they warned us that his recovery would be long and uncertain. We took turns sitting by his bedside, talking to him, hoping that he could hear us. I would often read to him from his favorite books or play the music he loved, anything to make him feel less alone. The nurses told us that even though he was in a coma, he might still be aware of what was happening around him. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Jake's condition slowly began to improve, but he remained in a coma. The doctors said that his brain was healing, but they couldn't predict when or if he would wake up. The hospital became our second home. We spent countless hours in the waiting room, sharing stories about Jake, laughing and crying together. His parents were a constant presence, their hope unwavering despite the endless uncertainty. Then, one day, something miraculous happened. I was sitting by Jake's bedside, reading aloud from a book, when I noticed a flicker of movement. His fingers twitched, just a little, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. I immediately called for the nurse, and within minutes, the room was filled with medical staff. Jake's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in months, he was awake. The relief and joy that filled the room were indescribable. Tears streamed down my face as I leaned over him, my voice trembling. "Jake, you're back." He looked at me, his eyes unfocused and confused. It was clear that he didn't fully understand what had happened, but he was awake, and that was all that mattered. The road to recovery was long and arduous. Jake had to relearn how to do almost everything, walking, talking, even eating on his own. The accident had left him with a traumatic brain injury, and the process of healing was slow and painful. But Jake was determined. He fought with every ounce of strength he had, pushing himself to get better, to regain his life. I was there with him every step of the way, along with his family and friends. We encouraged him, supported him, and celebrated every small victory. The first time he took a step on his own, we cheered as if he had just won a marathon. When he spoke his first words, we were overwhelmed with emotion. Months turned into a year, and Jake continued to make progress. He had to adjust to a new normal, one where some things were harder than they used to be, where he had to live with the lingering effects of his injuries. But through it all, he remained positive, his sense of humor and his love for life intact. The accident had changed Jake, but it had also changed all of us. We had learned the value of every moment, the importance of love and friendship, and the strength that comes from standing by each other in the darkest of times. Jake never fully recovered to the person he was before the accident, but he didn't let that stop him from living a full and happy life. He found new passions, new ways to enjoy the world around him. He became an advocate for road safety, speaking at schools and community events, sharing his story in the hope that it might prevent others from experiencing the same fate. As for our friendship, it grew even stronger. We had been through something that few people could understand, and it had bonded us in a way that was unbreakable. We often talked about that fateful day, about how close we had come to losing each other and how grateful we were that we had been given a second chance. Years later, as I stood by Jake's side at his wedding, watching him exchange vows with the love of his life, I couldn't help but think back to those dark days in the hospital, to the fear and uncertainty, the sleepless nights, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness. And then I looked at Jake, happy, healthy, and surrounded by the people who loved him. And I knew that we had all been part of a miracle. Life is fragile, and it can change in an instant. But Jake's story is a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable challenges, there is always hope. There is always a way forward, as long as we have the strength to keep going and the support of those who care about us. Jake's journey wasn't easy, but it was one of courage, resilience, and love. And as I looked at him that day, I knew that no matter what the future held, he would continue to face it with the same determination and spirit that had carried him through the darkest days of his life. Jake's wedding was a beautiful affair, set in a sprawling garden under a canopy of twinkling lights. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and laughter echoed across the space as friends and family gathered to celebrate. It was a day that almost seemed impossible a few years ago, when Jake was lying unconscious in that hospital bed, fighting for his life. But now, here he was, standing tall and strong, holding the hand of the woman he loved. As the ceremony began, I couldn't help but recall how far Jake had come. After waking from the coma, his journey had been nothing short of a miracle. He had faced countless challenges, physical and emotional, but he had never given up. The determination in his eyes when he first took a step during rehabilitation, the tears of frustration when words wouldn't come out right, and the triumphant grin when he finally managed to run a short distance. All of these memories played in my mind as I watched him now, about to embark on a new chapter of his life. The road to recovery had been anything but smooth. Jake had to deal with the lingering effects of his brain injury, which included difficulty with memory, speech, and coordination. There were days when he would become frustrated, questioning if he would ever get back to the person he once was. But with every setback, Jake found the strength to push forward, supported by the love of his family and friends. His fiancée, Emma, had been a rock throughout his recovery. They had been dating for only a few months before the accident, but the ordeal brought them closer together. Emma was there every day, holding his hand, cheering him on, and reminding him of the life they would share once he got better. Her unwavering love and support were the light that guided Jake through the darkest times. After the accident, Jake had a new perspective on life. The experience had made him realize how precious every moment was, and he was determined to make the most of his second chance. He returned to his job, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He became more involved in his community, volunteering at local charities and mentoring young people who had experienced similar traumas. One of Jake's passions became speaking out about the dangers of distracted driving. The accident had been caused by another driver who had taken their eyes off the road for just a moment, but that moment had nearly cost Jake his life. He began speaking at schools and community events, sharing his story in the hope that it would prevent others from making the same mistake. His talks were powerful, often leaving audiences in tears, but they were also a source of healing for Jake. Each time he spoke, it was as if he was reclaiming a little more of the life that had been taken from him. Despite his busy schedule, Jake never lost touch with his friends. We often met up for dinner or a drink, reminiscing about the old days and making new memories. Our friendship had deepened after the accident, and we became more like family than friends. We were there for each other through thick and thin, and nothing could break the bond we had formed. As I watched Jake and Emma exchange their vows, I felt a deep sense of pride and happiness. They had been through so much together, and now they were standing on the brink of a bright and beautiful future. After the ceremony, as we toasted to the newlyweds, I couldn't help but think back to the night of the accident and how far we had all come since then. Jake's recovery had taught us all valuable lessons about life, love, and resilience. It had shown us the importance of never giving up, no matter how dire the situation might seem. It had reminded us to cherish the people we love, to be grateful for every moment, and to find joy even in the most difficult circumstances. As the night went on and the celebrations continued, I found myself sitting with Jake by the edge of the garden, away from the crowd. We talked about the journey that had brought us here, the highs and lows, and how much our lives had changed. Jake looked at me, his eyes filled with emotion, and said, "I wouldn't be here without you, without all of you. You guys never gave up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself." I shook my head, feeling a lump in my throat. "You're the one who did the hard work, Jake. We were just here to support you." He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lit up his face. And that's what made all the difference. As the night came to a close, and Jake and Emma drove off into the night to start their honeymoon, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought us all to this point. Life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges our way, but Jake's story was a testament to the power of perseverance, love, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship. In the years that followed, Jake continued to thrive. He and Emma started a family, and Jake became an amazing father, teaching his children the values he had learned during his recovery: strength, kindness, and the importance of never taking anything for granted. He remained active in his community, and his work as a speaker and advocate saved countless lives. But more than anything, Jake's story was a reminder that no matter how dark things might seem, there is always hope. There is always a way forward, as long as we have the courage to keep moving, the strength to keep fighting, and the love of those who stand by our side.